Alright, so here's an average speed problem that's a bit more challenging. So take a second, read the problem, draw the diagram if you need to, if it helps you study the stuff. So here we have a car. It's going to travel from start to all the way to point B to the right side of the diagram, and that is the distance that the diagram called D, capital D. But the problem breaks it up into two equal parts. It says that the first part of the distance is travel at a rate of 35 miles per hour. And then for the second half, which is from point A to point B, it is moving at a faster rate of 80 miles per hour. And the question asks us to find the average speed in miles per hour for the entire trip. So you're given a bit of information here, and a lot of information is not given to you. So I'll show you how to do this properly, using physics concepts, and then I'll show you how to do it just simply by thinking about it casually. All right. So from start to A is my first segment, and then from point A to B, which is my second segment, and then I have a third column on my page here as well for the entire trip. I need three columns because I have three different pieces of information given: the first, second, and the question asking for the entire trip. So I need three columns. All right. We know that the average speed function is distance over time. Here I denoted S1, D1, and T1 because that's my first segment. I'm going to use the same process for the second segment. So learn to use subscripts if you're not using it. It'll help you organize your information. And then here to the right side of the column, I have total average speed is equal to total distance divided by the total time. So the question is asking us to find the average speed for the entire trip. So S total, okay? In order to find S total, we need two quantities in physics. We need the total distance traveled, and we need the total time. And this is where your problem solving starts to come in. Just find these quantities, hopefully as painlessly as possible. The total distance, that you recognize in the diagram here, is just given as capital D. It didn't give us a value, it just gave us capital D. And it's okay to just plug in variable. So don't get intimidated, don't get scared, okay? So I know that I can replace the function instead of D total with just capital D because that's what it is expressed as in this particular problem. I know that the total time is simply T1 plus T2. So the car would take a certain amount of time to travel the first half of the distance. I don't know what that is, so I just call it T1. And then it would take an additional time to go from A to B, which is known as T2. But those quantities are not given to you directly. So it's okay to substitute in math statements that are true. So T total must be the first leg's time plus the second leg's time. So here you notice you have three unknowns. You have a capital D, which is not given to you. You have a T1 and a T2, which you don't know what it is. And this is where the problem solving comes in, okay? So hopefully as you practice, things get easier. So I don't know what T1 is. I don't know what T2 is. So that's going to kind of re-guide my attention to the first column and the second column. So in the first column, I know I can replace speed for the first leg with 35 miles per hour because it said so. Now you notice here D1. I don't know what D1 is, but what I do know is that it's half of the total distance. The total distance is capital D, and in this problem, it specifically states it's equal half. So I can take that distance and divide it by 2, and that's what I replace it with. So I don't know what D1 is. I substituted for a true statement, which is the total distance divided by half. I don't know what T1 is, and that's why I'm kind of stuck here on the right side. Okay, I don't know what T1, I don't know what T2 is. So the work I'm doing in the first two columns here is kind of help me isolate and substitute. So here, I know I can reduce this down to simply D divided by 2T1. You have a fraction in the numerator divided by a whole. So essentially, you just multiply the two denominators. In this case, 2 times T1 is 2T1 in the denominator. I hope your algebra is good. If that step there just lost you, you might want to review your algebra step in terms of having a fraction divided by a whole. Okay. So here I left out the units just to clean up my work a little bit. So instead of 35 miles per hour, I just carried 35 down. But you notice here T1 is in the denominator. So I need to get T1 in the numerator. To do so, I would multiply both sides by T1, and that'll cancel out the denominator on the right side, and then that'll bring the T1 up in the numerator on the left side. Okay, so I'll simplify that. I'll clean that up a little bit here. So canceling out T1s on the right side would simply leave you with D over 2. But you notice here T1 is not by itself yet, right? You got T1 times 35 Well, to get T1 by itself, you would just do the opposite operation, which is to divide both sides by 35. So if you divide both sides by 35, you would bring the 35 down to the denominator. So 35 times 2 would give you a value of 70. So T1 is indeed D over 70. You notice here there's no number involved in terms of an answer. I know that whatever D is, if you divide that by 70, I'll get the time. Okay, because D in this problem is kind of vague. It can be any distance you want. Okay, all right. Let's move to the second column. Okay, so I have an expression for T1. I need an expression for T2. Therefore, I can follow the same process. I went ahead and substitute S2 for 80 because it's given to me in the problem. I know what D2 is. D2 is the remaining half of the total distance. Again, the total distance being D, half of it, which is implied divided by 2. So you have a fraction here divided by T2. So a fraction divided by a whole would suggest that you take the two denominators and multiply it. So 2 times T2 would give you 2T2. So same algebra step here. T1 is the denominator. Let's go ahead and get to the numerator by doing proper algebra. Multiply both sides by T2. The T2 on the right cancels out. That leaves you with T2 times 80 is equal to D over 2. And then to get T2 by itself, we would divide both sides, again, in this step here by 80. And then, so bring the 80 on the left side, the equal sign, down into the denominator on the right side, would suggest that you take 2 times 80, which the product gives you 160. So here you have two expressions. You have T1 is equal to D over 70. You have T2, which is equal to D over 160. All right. So what we can do now is we can substitute. Okay. So in our original statement here to find S total, we needed to know distance, but we weren't given the value. We need to know T1, but we don't know what the value is, and likewise with T2. But what we just did is we solved for T1, we solved for T2, find two expressions that are in terms of D. Okay, so the problem is pretty much over. The rest of the problem here is just algebra, and I'll do step for step for you just in case your algebra skill is kind of rusty. Okay, here you have to find common denominator. So I notice in the big denominator here, I have a D over 70 plus a D over 160. 70 and 160 are not the same, so you have to find common denominator. So to find a common denominator for that, I just did this right here. I notice that this is 70 and that's 160, so I can just multiply the left fraction by 16. You can multiply by 160 if you want. You're just making values bigger. I just went ahead and ignored the zeros, so I kind of saw the denominators as 7 and 16. Okay, so I just multiply the left fraction by 16, and then I multiply the right fraction by 7, and those values again come from the denominator themselves. So from here, you just simplify. Okay. I carried the D down. 16 times D is 16D. 16 times 70 is 1,120. 7 times D in the numerator is just simply 7D. And then 7 times 160 is 1,120. So you notice now here in the two fractions in the denominator sit over a common denominator. So therefore I can just simply simplify or add. So 16D plus 7D, which is equal to 23D on the right side here. Because it sits over a common denominator, I can just write that denominator on the bottom. But you notice here, you have D in the numerator, and then you're dividing by a fraction. So the rule in math is that anytime you have a whole number divided by a fraction, you need to multiply by the reciprocal of this quantity in the denominator. So that would look like this. Okay, so multiplying by the reciprocal of the denominator would simply imply flipping the denominator upside down. So here I have D, I carry that D down. So instead of 1,120 in the bottom, you flip it to the top, which implies that the 23D goes on the bottom, and the D cancels out. You have a D in the numerator, you have a D in the denominator, so therefore you just have 1,120 divided by 23, and that should give you a value of about 48.7. So it's important that you don't get intimidated with these problems. Kind of set things up, know what it is that you're trying to solve for, and then kind of slowly, trim down the problem. Find what you're missing, substitute if possible, and then usually these problems work out. It's just a matter of practice. Okay. All right. So here is the other way to do it. You can simply just kind of crank it out by simply picking a value for D. It's very vague here. It didn't tell you what D is. And you can pick any value for D and it'll give you the same answer. Okay, you can pick 100, you can pick 5,000, you can pick 5. It all depends what you want to do. So here I have the same work set up, right? I'll start with, grouping my information. S1 equals D1 over T1, S2 equals D2 over T2, and then S total, again, is equal to D total over T total. But you notice here, a D was not given to you, okay? You can actually pick any D value that you want. If you don't trust me, try it out a couple times and you'll see that the answer comes out the same because it's the same ratio. All right, so here, personally, I will set capital D from start all the way to finish, point B, as 2 miles. And now in case you're going, why 2? Why not other numbers? Well, if D is 2, the first half would just be 1. The second half would also just be 1 miles. Okay, so I chose 2 because I'm seeing it and I like to just use 1. I don't want to use any other values that's bigger than 1 because it's just going to make my math a little more messy. So why not pick 1? Okay, so again, I chose D as 2 miles because they're equal distance, and half of 2 would be 1, the other half would be 1. All right, so that's the reason why I chose 2. So from here, I can just do the same process. S1 is 35 miles per hour is given. D1, I just replace it with 1 mile, which is over T1. So you notice here in this expression, unlike the proper approach in the previous slide, you just call D1 1 mile. So the only unknown variable here is T1. So to get T1 by itself, again, multiply both sides by T1 in order to bring it up to the numerator. And then you have T1 times 35 is equal to 1. Well, divide both sides by 35, so therefore T1 is equal to 1 over 35. And you can reduce this down to a decimal at this point if you want. But in my work, I'm just going to keep it as a fraction in case you need to practice on to find common denominator. Okay. In the second column, I've done the same. I carry down the speed, which is 80. The distance is 1 mile because it's the other half of 2. Again, I chose 2 strategically here so I can keep my numerators as 1 and 1. And same process here. You have your unknown, which is T2. It is the only variable that's unknown. However, it's in the denominator. In order to get it to the numerator, you multiply both sides by T2. That leaves you with this, divided by 80. So therefore, T2 is equal to 1 over 80. I can do the same process here in this one as the previous slides, except now I'm just replacing it with the number that I've chosen. So instead of D, I call it 2. 2 miles. Again, I'm leaving all the units out here. Instead of T1, I know that T1 is just 1 over 35. And then T2 is simply 1 over 80. So you notice here is just a bunch of numbers. At this point, if your calculator skill is really good, you can just punch it in your calculator and get an answer. But this is for the rest of you folks who might need a little help in terms of finding common denominators and kind of brushing up on your math skills. Okay. I have 1 over 35 plus 1 over 80 in the denominator. They do not have the same denominator. So in order to find the same denominator, I multiply the left fraction by 80 over 80 because that's the denominator on the far right fraction. And then the far right fraction we multiply by 35 over 35 because the denominator in the first fraction is 35. So hopefully you were taught that little skill in math. If not, review. All right. So if you do that, you can just simplify the stuff here. Okay, the 2 in the numerator hasn't changed. 80 times 1 is simply 80. 80 times 35 is 2,800. In the second set of parentheses in the denominator, 35 times 1 is simply 35. And then 35 times 80 will also give you 2,800. And now we have a common denominator of 2,800. So we can just simply add the numerators. So 80 plus 35 is 115, and that sits over the same denominator, which is 2,800. So you notice here, you have the same kind of concept here. You have a whole number divided by a fraction, so therefore you would multiply by the reciprocal of the denominator, which is this. So the 2 gets carried down. The flip, or the reciprocal of 115 over 2,800 is 2,800 over 115. And here, if you simplify 2 times 2,800, would just give you 5,600. And then the denominator here is just 115, so I just carry that over. So if you simplify that, you'll get the same answer. Okay. Again, I do want to point out, this is just a strategy where you're like, wait, I don't know what D is. Can I make it whatever value I want? The answer is yes. But the work is similar. It's very similar. It's just you just have less variable to think of. Okay. So if you don't like D being 2, try it out with 4, try it out with 200, try it out with whatever numbers you want to do. But I would encourage you to think and try to make your life easy by picking a value that makes the work easy. I just chose 2 because I think that's the clever way to go. All right, other than that, I hope that helps. Stay nerdy, don't be whack.